estamos con una mesa que es plato fuerte. Enseguida lo van a ver. Miren, modera la mesa Javier Brey, que como saben es presidente de la Asociación Española del Hidrógeno, es director de tecnología de H2V, la empresa que él mismo fundó en 2016, ha colaborado con varios gobiernos y con Naciones Unidas, y le tomó prestada una frase suya, señor Brey, la publicaba en los periódicos hace algunas semanas. Decía, el hidrógeno representa una verdadera oportunidad para Andalucía, tenemos un potencial fantástico desde el punto de vista industrial e innovador. Vamos a hablar de ello acompañado de 5 ponentes más. Les voy contando. Bert de Colvenaer es CEO de WaterstofNet desde 2023. Es una plataforma de conocimiento y colaboración para contribuir a una sociedad neutra en carbono, con proyectos en Flandes, Países Bajos y el Benelux. Va a pasar también la doctora Kirsten Westphal, miembro de la Junta Directiva de BDEW, que es la Asociación Alemana de Industrias de Energía y Agua. También es miembro del Consejo Nacional del Hidrógeno y continúa como asesora externa en importantes órganos. Es autora de numerosas publicaciones sobre relaciones internacionales de energía. Junto a ella se va a sentar Ana Quelhas, que es directora general de Hidrógeno de EDP Renewables. Antes de eso, ha desarrollado diferentes puestos directivos y de liderazgo, contribuyendo con una perspectiva a largo plazo del sector energético. También en la Dirección General de Investigación en Bruselas y en Estados Unidos, en el operador independiente del Sistema de California. También es doctorada por la Universidad de Iowa. Tenemos a Daniel Fraile, que es director de Políticas de Hidrógeno de Europa, donde lidera el trabajo de inteligencia de mercado de la Asociación, 18 años de experiencia de políticas energéticas, tecnologías renovables y cooperación internacional. Es ingeniero de telecomunicaciones. Vean el nivel de la mesa, ¿eh? Continuamos con el último ponente, José Andrés González, ingeniero industrial con máster en la Universidad de Gales, más de 25 años de experiencia en el sector químico, actualmente en el Centro Europeo de Innovación para la Transformación Industrial y las Emisiones del Centro de Investigación de la Comisión Europea. Tienen 45 minutos, no sé cómo lo van a hacer. ¡Ánimo! Gracias.
Thank you for being here, especially taking into account the very nice day that we have outside. And welcome to this session on the regulatory framework for hydrogen project development in European countries. As the hydrogen economy grows, having a clear and harmonized regulatory framework becomes essential. Regulation is the key pillar for our industry, determining investment decisions, fostering innovation, and ensuring sustainable development. Today, we are honored to be joined by a distinguished group of experts, each with extensive experience in shaping the hydrogen sector. Their perspectives will illuminate current challenges, uncover opportunities, and highlight best practices within the regulatory landscape across the European Union. Their views will help us better understand how we can address barriers and accelerate the deployment of hydrogen projects. So let's start, and let me start this roundtable with Bert. Bert, looking at the hydrogen value chain, where should we focus efforts to stimulate new hydrogen projects?
Thank you, Javier, and thank you for having me here. I will try to answer the question in a short and concise way. What we're trying to do with the hydrogen community is that we would like to establish hydrogen value chain. Hydrogen value chain in similar kind of perspective was what has been done in the past with the petrochemical. Hydrogen can be used as a fuel, as a chemical commodity, and as an energy vector. And we really have the ambition to try to set this up in a very similar way. But the petrochemical value chain took 120 years and cost a fortune. And obviously, if we want to do something similar for the hydrogen value chain, it will take similar time and similar effort, financial effort. Now, and allow me to be a little prescriptive, is the full value chain. You have the production, the distribution and storage, and then the usage. And making hydrogen is the simple part of the whole value chain. Okay, to make it cheap and to make it in high volume and so on, it's a little more complicated, but making is very simple. Distribution and storage, a little more complicated. But what is the key is that the usage of hydrogen And in the bigger volumes, of course, is going to be the most complex part. If you look at the DRI, if you look at the chemicals, if you look at the fertilizers, if you look at all the off-takers' mobility, that is really going to be very complicated. And as you all know physically, you cannot push on a chain. You can only pull on a chain. I think that's very simple. And that's why when we look at new projects, I think from my perspective, and that's the same we do in our organization in Flanders, is we have to stimulate the off-takers. So if there is one message in reply I would like to say is that new projects should help to stimulate the off-takers, the users, the end users of the hydrogen value chain.
I have to say that I completely agree with your point of view. First, the transversal nature of hydrogen. Second, what you have said about the timing. We are talking about changing the energy paradigm, and that means decades, not just a couple of years. And talking about the final users. Kirsten, Germany has developed a core hydrogen network. What's the regulatory framework behind this?
I mean, building on what Bert said, and I completely agree, it's extremely important to have a secured offtake, and this means bridging the price. And this is what we were also discussing in Germany, that of course there has to be a parallel and synchronized building up of the value chain. But there are two preconditions before you can start with that. And I would say one is hard infrastructure, that is exactly the core hydrogen grid, and the other one is soft infrastructure, and that is regulation. And talking about the hard infrastructure, you know that the industrial centers of Germany are quite far away from the coast and widely dispersed across the country, and this is why a hydrogen core grid is so important. And to give you the answer, the approach is to have a planned precaution, well, a forward-looking hydrogen backbone that reaches all industrial centers in Germany, of course with some time difference, and to have an integrated planning of both gas, still natural gas, but also hydrogen. And the hydrogen core grid consists of 60% repurposed gas pipelines and 40% newly built. And the regulatory framework behind is the idea that, of course, if you have such huge investments, and we are calculating with 20 billion, then this means high transport fees for the first customers. And this could be prohibitively too high. And this is why we have an approach of an amortization account that stretches over time. So all customers pay the same, and the state gives a subsidiary guarantee. So this is stretched.
Yeah. It's funny because 3-4 years ago, everybody was talking about production of hydrogen, and now people is talking about the demand of hydrogen, but infrastructure is in the middle, connecting the production with the demand. So it's something that we really need. And I love the concept of soft infrastructure. Anna, what are the main barriers to develop the hydrogen economy, and what's the need for it to take off?
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to be here. It's a real pleasure. And your question, I mean, we could spend an entire conference dedicated to the barriers to develop renewable hydrogen, because there are so many. And actually, the two colleagues we have here already talked about two main obstacles, which one of them, the lack of demand, clear demand willing to pay the true costs that renewable hydrogen carry, and the lack of existing infrastructure. Maybe I would like to start by complimenting in particular the comments made on infrastructure and the need to really put together, you mentioned gas infrastructure, traditional, conventional gas with hydrogen, but we really need to go beyond that and look at networks and the infrastructure in a more holistic view and integrate the power system here, because actually one of the main barriers to develop renewable hydrogen projects is not just the lack of existing gas infrastructure, but the bottlenecks on the power grid itself. And actually, I believe there's plenty of room to kickstart the hydrogen economy by producing and consuming in a decentralized form, and by doing that avoid a complex logistics of pipes that is not in place. But for that, we still need to access the power infrastructure, and sometimes that's a bottleneck. But for me, the main bottleneck that is really behind everything is the cost competitiveness against the alternatives. So the main barrier to really go ahead with projects and move from the development to an investment decision and a commercial project is the fact that all of the projects have a gap, an important competitive gap against the alternatives. And there's no clear willingness to pay premiums on top of the alternatives. So that's the main barrier, and I mean, we can then discuss the ways forward to overcome that barrier.
Thank you, Anna. I'm quite happy to see that infrastructure is in every answer, but this means that we are really facing the approach of the market. We are now talking about the distribution, about the transmission of that hydrogen. But Kirsten has mentioned the soft infrastructure. Daniel, I have a difficult one for you, sorry about that. The European Union has adopted directives and regulations from Fit for 55, completing the regulatory framework for hydrogen. So apparently, we do have regulation. Why are not seeing investments flow? What's missing? Why we are not really seeing a lot of hydrogen projects in the pipeline?
Thanks. Well, first of all, also thanks to the organizers for inviting me here. It's a pleasure to be in Andalusia, my region, being back here and being in this very impressive conference. Well, I think I would fully agree with what Anna just mentioned. I think the competitiveness is a key issue. Infrastructure is also a key one. But if we look at it from the regulatory perspective, I think first of all, we don't have that demand coming in through the regulation. We have still a lot of work to be done when it comes to the implementation of this European legislative package, in particular the Renewable Energy Directive. Has to be transposed into national legislation by May this year. Countries are quite delayed on that transposition, including the Spanish government. I perceive there will be significant delays, maybe driven also by the fact of the competitiveness gap and also how we're going to finance this. But this is clearly one of the regulatory elements which is missing. Also from the demand perspective, and that will be very important to create demand on the industry sector. Also in the transport sector. There is a couple of countries like Finland who just adopted their legislation for transport. Also the Netherlands is clarifying their framework, and this also helps to drive some investment. Also from the demand perspective, we have the Refuel EU Aviation, so that will be setting binding targets on the aviation operators. And I think that it's a very strong market with very clear signals also for the penalties. And we will see, I assume, investments in the next couple of years. And then from the production perspective, yes, we have the definition of RFMBO. So it's a very complex definition and it's very restrictive, but at least the regulation is there. What we are missing is the adoption of the low carbon fuels delegated act. Because this can also help to complement your overall production. You will be sometimes producing renewable-based hydrogen, sometimes non-renewable-based, and so being able to certify that part of your production will be extremely important. And also being able to benchmark your, say, RFMBO against an alternative, which today we don't really know how it's going to be priced in the market. So I think those elements are still out there. We're still waiting for the implementation, hopefully in the next 6 months or so. And I hope that this will also trigger a bit more investment decisions.
Thank you, Daniel. To be honest, there was a trick in my question because the European Union has adopted directives, but we are still working in the transposition of those directives here in Spain. So, José, in CITE aims to drive industrial transformation and reduce emissions. From your perspective, what are the key ways this initiative could support the hydrogen sector?
Thank you, Javier, and I would like also to thank to the organizer of the Congress for inviting us to explain what is inside and in which way we can benefit the sector. And also for me, it's a pleasure to come back to Huelva. I started here my professional career, and I'm ready to see all colleagues and friends. So inside in this is the acronym of the Innovation Center for Industrial Transformations and Emissions. It's a new addition of the revised Industrial Emission Directive. The Industrial Emission Directive, as we all know, is a permitting directive, what we all associate with environmental permits. So there is a mechanism, what is called the BREF review, or the CBIL process, in which environmental norms are set for large industrial plants. So inside, what we do is a forward-looking mechanism into this process. So what we are currently doing is analyzing emerging potential techniques that could be fed into that process of determining what is the best available technology for the sector. No? In such as, for example, now we are analyzing a project that uses hydrogen, for example, in the steel sector, for direct reduction of iron ore, or a substitute in furnaces or natural gas, industrial furnaces, as well as the production of green methanol and many others. No? So that's the way that we approach that part. No? So there are different ways, three, in which insight could potentially or mainly benefit not only hydrogen sector, but in general the industry. First of all, and this is in the short term, is permitting. There are changes in the new environmental emission directive that allows derogations for testing emerging techniques. I will expand later on that because this is connected with insight. Also, the second benefit is that we are going to produce assessment reports oriented or focused on different sectors, for example, hydrogen, as much as many others. And this report, this assessment, are aimed to identify potential gaps, potential breach in how to reach to our climate neutrality goals in 2030, 2050. So this report could be influencing policy makers in Europe, as well as prioritizing funding. No? We don't have a funding mechanism as such in Insight, but we could influence where to put or where to make the priorities for the European Commission. And last but not least, also in this process, we could influence future regulation. So we can say that if a sector is mature enough, we could kick off the BREF review, and the other way around. If we see that a process in particular has not enough development, probably the BREF review will be delayed. No? So in that way, all the work that we do at Insight is connected with permitting, with regulation, and with prioritizing policies and funding.
So you're covering completely the soft infrastructure value chain from permitting to regulation. Thank you. Bert, another complicated one, but this is for you. What makes a hydrogen project succeed?
What makes a hydrogen project succeed? I think many of you are already in the hydrogen ecosystem for some time. And for sure, many of you have heard that FID, final investment decision, has not been taken. We're waiting FID to be taken, waiting for the green light to go forward. It's very similar to what I will try to explain to you. My professional career is about 35 years, and I've worked 20 years in the industry, automotive industry. What's the ambition of an industry is to make sure that you produce something with the right quality at the right time. So that, I think, is one of the essence of why a project should be successful. The second thing, second part of my professional life, I've worked for the European institutions for 15 years, and at that time I was responsible for subsidies, giving money to projects who were evaluated and were successful. And now I try to put these two things together. FIDs are not taken often because the scale of the progress is suddenly so big. And we have passed that situation where we were talking about a couple of millions, 10 million euros, to build some demonstrators of how to make, how to use, how to distribute hydrogen. And suddenly, in the time span of a couple of years, we have jumped from 10 millions to billions of euros within a couple of years. Order of magnitude has increased by 1,000 times. Now, nobody in industry is going to jump from one to another in such kind of volume and risk. So the financial and the risk-taking has taken a leap forward out of what I personally believe is going to be reasonable first. The second thing is, being in the European institutions, very often I have seen projects who really try to deliver in this kind of gigafactory kind of ambition. It's always nice to read, the sky is the limit, but finally the industry is still to be able to produce the right quality at the right time. And there it's where it sometimes goes wrong, where many of the projects just cannot deliver on what they have promised. So, turning everything around, what makes a successful hydrogen project? First, make sure you can deliver on what you promised. Don't jump from 10 millions to billions. Yeah? Just scale it up in what is normally an industrial way. And I know it's been said before, financially it may not be, especially in the beginning, perfect sense. But if you extrapolate, you can get there. First, make sure that you can deliver on your promises. And second, please make hardware. Yeah? I have had so many papers, more papers that anybody can read to evaluate, but it's just a paper. So what is more essential, and I come back to the answer of my first question, we have to stimulate the off-takers. Off-takers need hardware, actual things in their hand, not only paper. Deliver on your promise, and please make hardware, no paper.
Thank you. Kirsten, we have been talking about regulation, and Bert has mentioned ramp-up. What's the current status of the hydrogen ramp-up in Germany, and what role does regulation play?
Well, look, we had our first national strategy in 2020 on hydrogen, and this is just 4.5 years. So I think I echo a bit what Bert says. We need time. I mean, 4.5 years is nothing in the lead times of an energy industry. So what I'm saying is be a bit realistic and pragmatic, and I think we are very well moving forward. There have been some difficulties, as in overall Europe, with public money, but nevertheless, as I said, we have a decision and a planned and approved hydrogen core grid with 9,700 kilometers, and then an integrated planning, and you're right, electricity has to come in. There is now in preparation a strategy on storage, because storage is extremely important if you think about the sector coupling that hydrogen does, and not only electrolyzes towards hydrogen, but also the storages that we need. And we have seen a big jump in the last half year of 2024 because of the IPCEI, the important project of common European interest, because it's exactly what the others have said already. We need upscaling and we need upnumbering, and we need the working through the value chains. So I think Germany is in the same position as others are in Western Europe. And it's not just Germany, but it has to be Europe. And I think this is my major point to transfer. It has to be a European effort, because I think we are now look to our key industries and what they need in terms of sufficient, affordable, and secure energy, and also in a geopolitical surrounding where hydrogen does help in a way of sovereignty approach inside and for Europe. So of course the big challenge is bridging the price gap.
Tenemos también la brecha de los precios, y es algo con lo que tenemos que acabar. O sea, infraestructura, colaboración, paciencia también, efectivamente.
Ana,
¿qué tipo de herramientas políticas podrían ayudarnos en este sentido? Bueno, creo que la demanda no se ha cubierto del todo con esa infraestructura soft o suave, y claramente nos hemos centrado demasiado en la producción, pero también falta mucho más trabajo en la infraestructura. Y en cuanto a políticas, Daniel también lo mencionaba, nos ponía el ejemplo de la transposición de la normativa europea. Sabemos que hay objetivos para las energías renovables para 2030 con porcentajes del 35 al 60%. Pero hasta que se cumplan esos objetivos, pues, en primer lugar hay que transponer esas normas a los países miembros para garantizar esa transición, y no podemos simplemente sentarnos y esperar. Necesitamos incentivos
who will have to comply,
claridad
exactly what will be the penalties for not complying, because this
saber también cuáles son las sanciones en el caso de que no se cumplan esas normas.
That will inform the willingness to pay, that today is the
Por
great
supuesto,
product, the great alternative.
fundamentar
So
que
that's
haya
a very
voluntad de pago de
important
esas
piece of
sanciones.
information that is missing. And apart from
Por
that,
supuesto,
which
también
is
tenemos que
clear,
evitar que
regulatory
haya
framework and clear a way
carencias en
forward,
esas normas, que
we
se
can also think and we should
establezca
start
claramente
thinking
el camino a seguir.
Policy instruments, including funding,
Y dentro de los instrumentos tendríamos la financiación, que tendría que ser acorde a la demanda, porque sabemos que la demanda necesita inversión y a veces no se tiene en cuenta en el proceso industrial. Así que la demanda se tiene que apoyar también mediante financiación. Por supuesto, no todos los casos son iguales. Si hablamos del hidrógeno para sustituir al hidrógeno gris, por ejemplo, es un caso, pero para otras industrias es diferente. Y hay que establecer prioridades y que tengan sentido dentro de esa normativa. Y apoyar a las mejores. De acuerdo, muchísimas gracias, Daniel. En la Comisión Europea, ¿qué nuevas prioridades se tienen en cuenta en este sentido? Bueno, pues destacaría 3 cosas. Por supuesto, insisto en el problema de demanda, porque en los últimos 15 años siempre hemos tratado de reducir la huella de carbono de la producción en Europa. Tenemos herramientas para las energías renovables, electricidad, pero no le hemos prestado suficiente atención a otros componentes. Le ponemos demasiada presión y demasiada carga a la producción, pero no nos centramos, por ejemplo, en la importación, en los fertilizantes, etc. Y hay mecanismos que creo que deben centrarse más en garantizar la demanda de estas fuentes verdes, como el hidrógeno verde. Y si no se apoya, no vamos a lograr que los productores de acero o de otras industrias utilicen esos recursos y esas inversiones. Entonces, esta es una de las cuestiones clave. Luego también la simplificación. Y es una de las claves en la normativa. Hay que simplificar, porque muchas veces es difícil entender el mecanismo de financiación europeo y hay que facilitar un poco más el proceso de solicitud de las subvenciones. Es algo muy importante. Y la simplificación también se puede aplicar a la búsqueda de combustibles, que a veces el origen no queda claro, si es verde o no. Y también el tercer punto sería la infraestructura, que también se ha mencionado. La infraestructura de energía, de gas. La cuestión es entender el sistema como uno y no como varios. Y calcular el beneficio, el coste del sistema como si fuera un único sistema. Si no, vamos a entrar en competencia unos con otros cuando en realidad estamos hablando de un único sistema. Una vez que tengamos esa herramienta, creo que todo va a ser mucho más efectivo, se va a poder descarbonizar la industria con más agilidad. Muchas gracias. José, también habíamos hablado de los permisos y cómo se puede facilitar también.
Okay, indeed. Let me start saying that under the Industrial Emissions Directive, hydrogen is a particular chemical.
Que el hidrógeno es un componente químico particular. Porque, por ejemplo, si se utiliza para una refinería, se tiene que tener en cuenta únicamente la industria de refinerías y así sucesivamente. Entonces, necesitamos modificar de forma positiva una generalización. Por ejemplo, las categorías. Tenemos el anexo 1, por ejemplo, el punto 6 sobre el uso del hidrógeno. Y la exclusión de la actividad 4.2 de los químicos en la producción con la electrólisis del agua.
Son modificaciones que implican que hay límites en la electrólisis, que son 15 toneladas por día y que sería equivalente a 120 megavatios. Y son límites que se han establecido en Europa, pero según la fase por debajo de ese límite, tiene una implicación significativa en cuanto a las emisiones. Hay otra ventaja de esta generalización de las categorías, de estas modificaciones, y es que hay una derivación en el cumplimiento de los permisos. Y cada proyecto que se construya en fase industrial necesita una derogación de esa directiva de emisiones para poder considerarse aceptado. Y forma parte del grupo técnico y de sus categorías de técnicas para aportar información e identificar técnicas emergentes para las pruebas con plazos de hasta 30 meses. Y si no se cumplen esos 30 meses en esos plazos, pues se puede derogar también el permiso. Muchísimas gracias. José. Parece que estamos en un momento de cambio, de modificaciones, y me gustaría cerrar este panel con una pregunta corta. Solo tenemos 60 segundos por persona. ¿Cómo podemos promover un despliegue más rápido del hidrógeno? Bueno, pues voy a dar una respuesta bastante política. Y es que la semana pasada el presidente habló de la ambición, y es que en Europa tenemos una oportunidad enorme para descarbonizar la industria y contribuir también a la lucha contra el cambio climático. Y en la Unión Europea se invierte muchísimo dinero para esta ambición, para cumplir este objetivo, pero hay que garantizar que se desarrollan tecnologías que se comparen con lo que se compra, lo que se ofrece en otros lugares, en lugar de simplemente hablar de este objetivo ambicioso. Así que hay que aprovechar esta oportunidad, estos fondos, para conseguir tecnologías y ser tener una mayor competitividad. Yo también hablaría de la estrategia de hidrógeno de la Unión Europea, y es que necesitamos producir hidrógeno verde con pocas emisiones de carbono, y también tener en cuenta la electricidad, porque es algo muy importante. En Alemania, por ejemplo, el 60% de la electricidad en Alemania ya es renovable, y este es un paso muy importante que se permite con normativas flexibles y que contribuye también a la soberanía energética en Europa. Pero sí, son necesarias tecnologías, tanto con respecto al hidrógeno como a la industria química en general, para transformarlo en energía y lograr esa transformación. Bueno, es difícil añadir más comentarios, pero creo que es fundamental para tener éxito facilitar el marco legal. No basta solo con tener una ambición. Por supuesto, Europa es pionera en establecer objetivos, pero tenemos que marcar objetivos políticos claros que podamos cumplir con las
las herramientas que tenemos. Por ejemplo, reconocemos todos la necesidad de producir hidrógeno renovable de forma local, pero necesitamos instrumentos para la construcción y que sea suficiente para cumplir esos objetivos. Por ejemplo, con los fondos de resiliencia. Y que de esta forma se contribuya al CAPEX de estos proyectos. Y nos encontramos en una situación en la que muchos de los proyectos que han conseguido fondos de CAPEX no pueden avanzar porque no pueden solicitar otros mecanismos, porque no se le permite acumular fondos y diferentes subvenciones. Entonces creo que no estamos tomando el camino adecuado y creo que necesitaríamos revisar un poco el diseño de esta estrategia para ser eficientes y no quedarnos incompletos. Necesitamos herramientas eficientes y mecanismos políticos para de verdad conseguirlo. Yo puedo hablar de la perspectiva del equipo en los proyectos. Y nosotros hablamos de la descarbonización, pero también hay que hablar de la competitividad global. Es algo que también se ha destacado, se menciona en informes relevantes. Y hay algunos sectores en los que Europa sigue siendo muy competitiva. Así que creo que es importante que se promueva la tecnología europea, tecnología desarrollada y creada en Europa. Tenemos herramientas políticas y quizás no son las mejores, pero aunque tal vez se necesiten redefinir, dan una idea de que no debemos priorizar herramientas, productos de China, sino proponer nuestras propias soluciones que sean competitivas y que fortalezcan y promuevan la cadena de valor europea. Pero sí, necesitamos mucho más desarrollo, resistencia, competitividad y seguridad también, porque muchos de los avances vienen de la eólica, pero necesitamos una tecnología principal, infraestructura, porque creo que puede ser una ventaja clave para Europa a largo plazo. Gracias. José. Muchas gracias. Yo ya hemos hablado de la Comisión Europea, de todas las acciones en vigor para promover el despliegue de proyectos de hidrógeno, pero efectivamente se necesita más, no es suficiente. Proyectos de interés común como los que se han mencionado hoy, la brújula de competitividad, por ejemplo, que se ha hablado también hoy. Y sí, centrarnos en el trabajo industrial. Y creo que me gustaría aprovechar también esta ocasión para decir que sí, debemos centrarnos en la eficiencia, la economía circular, la descarbonización, porque es la forma de mejorar y progresar el sector. Y para ello necesitamos también a todos los actores, todas las partes interesadas, los productores, las organizaciones, las empresas, las instituciones, y que así se consiga de la forma más beneficiosa para todos. Sí, entonces destacamos esa necesidad para el futuro. Vemos que la eficiencia y la competitividad es esencial en toda la región europea y también la demanda. Hemos subrayado la importancia de la colaboración y que es fundamental para lograr ese despliegue y cumplir los objetivos. Y también la infraestructura. Me gustaría dar las gracias a todos los participantes de este panel y también a todos y todas por prestar atención a esta mesa redonda. Juntos y juntas podemos lograr un impacto real. Muchísimas gracias.